Thank you. Thank you, Claire, and thank you to all of you for coming out today. I'm thankful that I have a short introduction today before you get to listen to the real experts. So Stony Point is one amongst 112 pieces of land that CapeNature manages all across the province. But we like to bring visitors here because it is one example where on a day like this, World Environment Day, we can show that there are some successes where national government, provincial government, local municipal government, and thank you to the Ward Councillor for being here representing our local governance structures, is to say it can work when we have conservation NGOs, research organizations, bringing in the community so they are partners in conservation. We do want to try and take the lessons from here to those other 112 areas. Not all of them are open to the public. We have about 30 of them that allow visitors, and that's the CapeNature Reserve that you know all around the province. But here is where we've learned, where CapeNature, in its 25 years of existence this year, has learned how to build partnerships. And the partnerships, as Edith, where's Edith? Edith will say, we've actually, this is our second round of trying this because we've learned what not to do in the first round, at least. And we've learned to build on that. So here's something where we have a coastal interface, protected area. We have people living here. We have an opportunity to generate some income that can be put back into conservation. And most importantly, we are one of the largest remaining penguin colonies. So why are penguins important? The expert here will tell you. From a conservation manager point of view, taking the oceans from the chemistry of the oceans to the plankton to all of the lionfish to the seals, the seabirds and the whales and all of that, we don't have the time, the money and the resources to measure everything. Is everything working? But species like the penguins, it's like taking the pulse of the ecosystem. If you look at what's happening to the penguins, it gives you a good understanding, is there something happening to the ecosystem? Is it working well? The panel will tell you the numbers of penguins have halved about twice in the last 10 or 15 years at this point. So something to be concerned about, but generally in the country. So is it a deeper issue? Is it a penguin-only issue? What are we doing that's causing this? Is it a decline in that? Ultimately, as humans, we are part of this ecosystem. Our weather, our fresh water, especially in the Western Cape, our ability to fight off diseases in livestock, wild animals, and in ourselves depends on healthy ecosystems. We don't know much more than what we do know about functioning ecosystems. So it's best, in our best interest, to keep everything working as it is, because we don't know what we don't know about ecosystems and what we're letting in and what we're letting out and what we're allowing to grow unchecked. So welcome to the penguins at this colony at Stony Point. The penguins are important because of their status as an ecosystem indicator species, but also because of the local role they play in this ecosystem, which I'm sure the panel will tell you about. It is a chance to rally behind a keystone species to show that as South Africans, we do take care of what is important to South Africa in our natural environment, because no one else is going to do it for us. Many people in the room today know each other, and they know each other for 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 years, some even more than that. And that's an important lesson that we've learned. When you get people together who don't know each other in a crisis, the first few years are spent dealing with your insecurities about each other. But because we have a consistency of people and partnerships across the NGO and government sector here, when we get around the table, we're continuing the discussion we've started 5 or 10 years ago. There's no surprises. And that's an important lesson that I'm hoping the panel will get to talk about today. Let me stop talking there and say, engage the panel. Some of our other senior managers are here today as well. Some of our other staff from both CapeNature and our partnership organizations. The focus really is on how do partners work together for the next 3 decades to ensure that none of us are reading anything about the penguins in 2035 that we don't want to read. And 2035 is a date also that the panel may mention today. So the idea is, what do we do now in 2025 so that we're reading good things in 2035? No surprises, consistency of partnerships, and consistency of faces around the partnership. So to all those faces who've been coming here for the last 10, 20, and 30 years, thank you to all of you, and we want to celebrate you like we are celebrating the penguins today on World Environment Day. Thank you.
I love your work. I love your work. We have Head of Conservation at SANCCOB, Nicky Stander. Seabird Conservation Program Manager, BirdLife SA, Alistair McInnes. And finally, Landscape Conservation Intelligence Manager at CapeNature, Alana Duffell-Canham. Join us, please. I see you started from the other side, Craig. You don't want to sit next to me. No, it's fine, it's fine. I'll sit next to Alana, Kishop. Thank you to our panelists, first of all, for your time today and for joining us. I'll start with you, Craig. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about WWF's work with the Kogelberg small-scale fishing community and how it relates to penguins, but also to alternative livelihoods.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for the warm welcome, everyone. And WWF has been involved here in the Kogelberg for more than a decade. And when we think about communities, coastal communities in particular, coastal communities are some of the most marginalized and vulnerable groups in our society. And they typically do not have a voice with government. And the press that they get is often, in terms of bad press, in terms of, in this particular area, you have the scourge of poaching, and that's what communities are labeled with. Our work with coastal communities is looking at, if you spend time with them, you understand that there's a need to conserve, to protect the oceans. There's a love, there's a passion for the oceans, but they need to be given opportunities and they need to be empowered to do so. So our job as WWF is trying to make that connect, to be able to allow communities to play a vitally important role in stewardship of our oceans.
Thank you so much. Nicky, given the reduced penguin population numbers, and we know that every individual penguin needs a fighting chance just to survive, maybe you can share how important it is to monitor this particular population.
Yes, sure. Good morning, and thank you for welcoming us this morning. SANCCOB's involvement with this colony goes back many, many years, and watching this video really made me quite choked up because it's very well done, WWF. It's a wonderful way to show how many people are involved in this colony and how many people are dependent on this colony. So looking at Marcelin, who's now working with WWF, his dad that he referred to, Marcelo, was employed by SANCCOB many years ago, and it was wonderful just to see how he's followed in his dad's footsteps. So one of the major projects at SANCCOB is to help the conservation authorities with monitoring wild seabird populations. And we have seabird rangers or conservation monitors dotted around the coastline in the Eastern Cape and Western Cape, helping the conservation authorities to monitor the penguins and other seabirds and intervene if necessary. So really providing that direct support, on-the-ground support to monitor the birds. And of course, we run 2 seabird hospitals, one in the Western Cape and one in the Eastern Cape. And if they require rescuing and rehabilitation, then they're obviously transferred to those hospitals. So the monitoring of this species is incredibly important because the numbers are declining at a very frightening rate, and every single day is an opportunity for us to rescue an abandoned egg or to rescue a penguin that requires rehabilitation for us to give it a chance to get it back out into the wild and hopefully breed and carry on. So that's our involvement, and we are incredibly proud to be working with CapeNature and BirdLife and WWF on this.
Thank you so much, Nicky. To you, Alistair, with the resolution of the court case around the penguins' foraging grounds having come through recently, what next? What now?
Yeah, that's quite an important question, Claire. So the recent settlement that we had with the court case, so that was a collective effort with SANCCOB, ourselves, the Biodiversity Law Centre, and quite a protracted process that came to a conclusion in March, which sees improved closures at 6 colonies. Some of them are still the same as they were before, but an example like Stony Point has a vast improvement, more than 3 times greater in size and representativity of the important penguin foraging areas. So we're quite pleased about the outcome of that. Also, Robben Island has a vastly improved island closure. What we need to do now is obviously monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of these different closures against different levels of fishing pressure. Obviously, fishing pressure will be excluded from the no-take zones, but there will be fishing pressure on the edge of these zones. So we need to look at the impacts of edge effects, especially around colonies like Duffell-Canham Island, where we're quite concerned with the area to the north that isn't protected. What we find on the west coast during winter is that the anchovies move quite predictably downstream inshore, and there's the potential for edge effects north of Duffell-Canham Island colony. So we need to watch that colony very closely. Dye Island as well is another one where there's lots of fishing pressure, and we're looking into the adequacy of the current closure configurations. So there's a diversity of sort of efficacy in terms of the extent of these closures and the fishing pressures they face. So we need to work with our partners, including CapeNature, SANCCOB, academia, and others, to monitor various responses of these penguins, both out at sea, so their foraging efficiency, but also how that translates into the colony in terms of breeding success and ultimately population growth. So there's lots of work to do, and it will take some time to see the results. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alistair. Alana, I think some people have touched on it a little bit in their answers, a little bit with what Ashley said earlier, but perhaps you can give us a bit of context about Stony Point. How is it doing? Just give us a bit of contextual presence on how Stony Point is right now.
Sure, thanks for the question. Stony Point's a relatively young penguin colony, with the first penguins sort of settling here only in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. And at first it saw some really, really good growth, which peaked at around 2011. Unfortunately, since then, we've seen quite a steady decline in the number of breeding pairs, with quite a shocking difference just between 2023 and 24, going from about 1,200 breeding pairs down to 600. This might not be because they have died, to put it bluntly. We do think that many of them are choosing not to breed because they're not in the condition that they need to be to breed. They need to have enough food to be in a state where they can forage far and wide because the fish stocks are so widely distributed. We've also found that there's been a shift in behavior, particularly with molting, where molting used to happen sometime after the breeding season. We're now seeing an overlap where the birds are molting earlier than normal. And while the birds are molting, they lose their waterproof feathers, so they can't swim and they can't forage, so they lose a lot of their body condition during that phase, which means that if there's still chicks in the nests that need to be fed, they can't feed them, so that leads to abandonment as well. So it's a mixed bag of reasons that they can't, but it ultimately comes down to the food sources, which affect their body condition and their decision whether to partner for the year and try and have a nesting attempt. Thanks.
Just staying with you, Alana, how is CapeNature just making sure that they're communicating the crisis of the declining African penguin population to not just the rest of South Africa, but to tourists as well that come through?
Yeah, thanks for that. We have a really good advocacy department that has a very good social media presence. We have newsletters which go out regularly with articles that do highlight the plight of the penguin. Then annually we host what we call the Penguin Palooza in partnership with SANCCOB and WF and several things. It has quite good attendance from the local community schools, the general public, and tourists that are around. We also have signage in the area, and what was quite good, I think last summer we saw a 28% increase in the number of visitors that come to Stony Point, and that money does get fed back into conservation efforts for the species. Thanks.
Thanks. Craig, why is the declining population of African penguins such a concern for WWF in particular?
Yeah, just last night we had a bit of a discussion with colleagues, and the sentiment is this is a charismatic species, and it's loved by a lot of people. People come from all over the world to come look at our penguins. And if we can't protect this species, then what species can we protect? So it's kind of unthinkable how we can allow the species to go extinct with all our technological advancements, with all our collaborations, with all the partnerships. So on that level, it's just unthinkable. But on another level, and this is something that Ashley touched on in his opening, is that when you look at the ocean, from where we are sitting, you can't see what's going on in the ocean. And to understand the depths of how the ecosystems function, the status of resources is a very costly exercise. And what the penguins do for us is that the penguins are an indicator species. And they're indicator species because they are specialist feeders. They prey on sardines and anchovy, which are small pelagic fish that kind of supports the whole food chain in the ecosystem. And when penguins start declining in terms of body condition, as was discussed earlier, we get a sense of what's happening in the ecosystem. There's just not enough food to sustain the penguin populations. And it's not just the penguins, there's a whole ripple effect. And that is, you've heard from the video clip, there are small-scale fishes that target other top predators in the environment, and their livelihoods are also jeopardized because there's just not enough food in the ecosystem to sustain those other livelihoods. So penguins, critically important that we can't allow the species to go extinct, but at a level of indicating the health of our southern Benguela ecosystem, it's also problematic. We got grave concerns in terms of its health, and we're seeing downward trends of a number of species in our marine ecosystems. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Nicky, maybe you can share with us some of the efforts that SANCCOB is putting in place to ensure penguin survival and enhance penguin survival.
Sure, thanks, Claire. I think it's very difficult what we're all trying to do, and the level of complexity of the threats facing the species is enormous. Hence why we're seeing this consistent decline of the species. But for SANCCOB, obviously we're helping with the monitoring aspect, trying to get ahead of some of these threats and try to intervene when we need to. And some of those decisions are often quite difficult to make, because when do you draw the line in, your interference with nature? But some of these events may be heat-related or extreme weather, flooding events, where we know from history that penguins may experience flooding of nests, which then lead to abandonment of chicks or eggs, which is obviously going to impact the breeding success of the species. So we work very closely with CapeNature on trying to understand what's happening with those patterns, when we can expect to see an event happening, and what we can do to try and be as proactive as possible. In terms of what we do at the hospitals, we're literally throwing every resource we can at the species. So whether that's veterinary surgery, we have a full-time clinical vet on staff, and we're at the point where we're doing blood transfusions for species, or for penguins specifically, because their status is so critical. we have to try absolutely everything possible to save each individual. So it may be a fracture repair. Penguins are particularly sensitive to predation at sea and on land at this colony. And we see penguins coming to the hospitals with severe wounds, like very deep gashes or broken legs. And some of those are very good candidates for fracture repairs. So obviously the resources involved in this treatment are very expensive, but we know that it's worth it. Of course, we have to recognize that this alone is not going to save the species. You know, rescuing penguins on a reactive level and bringing them to the hospital for rehabilitation and release is certainly not going to save the species. We recognize that solving the problems in the ocean, like making sure that there's enough food available, mitigating threats such as predation, disease, etc., is what's going to save the birds in the end. So we are very much reactive in that sense, but it does contribute to the population. And I think without the rescue and rehabilitation, the species certainly would have been a lot lower today. No worries.
There's a demerit.
We also run a chick bolstering project, which has been running since 2006, and that really involves rescuing the abandoned eggs and chicks from the colonies, not just Stony Point, but mostly at Simonstown. And that artificial program is very successful. So without it, some of those chicks would have certainly died in the wild. And so this is an opportunity to try and bolster the wild population by artificially incubating eggs at our hospital in Tableview and rearing them until fledgling age where they can be released back into the wild. And lastly, I'll just mention the disease surveillance program. So I'm sure some of you would be aware of the avian influenza outbreak. This is a highly pathogenic disease that has had a huge impact on bird populations globally, and it has impacted African penguins as well as other seabirds. And so we run a very robust disease surveillance program where carcasses are evaluated at our hospital. Postmortems are carried out to evaluate the cause of death and to take samples to determine whether they are affected or impacted by disease. So the rationale behind this is that if we have positive results, we can then give management authorities a heads up to say there is a positive tested bird that's come through, and then the management authority can take the necessary action. So that's very much a proactive program that we're running as well.
Isn't it incredible to hear how busy they are and what they're doing? Thank you so much, SANCCOB. My goodness. To you, Alistair, what plans are in place to monitor the effects of the fishing ground closures, and how do we know, or when will we know when it's working?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So there have been monitoring programs in place around certain colonies for quite some time, especially those that were involved in what they called the island closure experiment, which was 2 islands on the west coast, Robben and Dassin, and 2 in Algoa Bay, St. Croix and Bird. There's been ongoing monitoring of certain aspects at those colonies. Now we have 2 additional colonies, Dyer and Stony, off this coastline here, and Stony. And both those colonies, CapeNature, have been monitoring for quite some time as well. What we need to do now is to make sure that all the colonies between the different managing authorities, so CapeNature, SANCCOB, Robben Island Museum, City of Cape Town, consistently collect the same data so that we can evaluate the impacts of the different closures around the different colonies in 6 years' time, and then there'll be another review in 10 years' time. So the 6 years... the reason why that number was put forward by the international panel of experts that convened in 2023, and that number is associated with when most young birds are breeding for the first time. So they breed between 4 and 6 years old, but after 6 years, we should get more than 95% of those juveniles born in the first year of closure should have the opportunity to recruit back to the colonies. And then the review in 10 years is related to measuring survival of African penguins, because 10 years is one generation length. So there's various sort of yardsticks that we can look at. In the short term, we can see if they improve their foraging efficiency. So we have, BirdLife has put out a few what they call automated penguin monitoring systems. You see one here at Stony Point today. Basically, they're a combination of weigh bridges and pit tag readers with a little computer system that transmits the condition of the birds in real time to a server. And you can go visit that site at penguinalert.org, and you can see the condition, the raw data of the condition of the birds at 4 colonies here, Robben Island, Dyer Island, and at Bird Island in Algoa Bay. So that'll give you a very rough near-time estimate of how the conditions are. You can see if the weights are above average or below average of the birds coming in from the sea, especially. So that'll give you a short-scale window into their condition. But the real important stuff is how that translates into the population growth, and that we will see in things like what CapeNature and SandParks and others are measuring, like breeding condition, breeding success, and then ultimately the population counts. So that would take a bit longer to realize in the population.
All of this work and all of these efforts require money, right? So let's talk a little bit about that, Alana. Is there adequate state funding for African penguin conservation efforts on the ground?
So I've been given permission to be blunt here and say no.
Great, wonderful.
Absolutely no. Our CEO, Dr. Ashley Naidu, did refer earlier to how many land parcels are under our management. We have several other endangered and critically endangered species to protect as part of our mandate, not to mention the ecosystems as well, trying to maintain connectivity in the landscape. And we have a massive task, not only on reserve, but dealing with off-reserve conservation issues and threats as well. So yes, we are very dependent on working with partners to help us with capacity. If we had more money, I would like to see more, not just boots on the ground, but capable, trained people that can ensure that we're getting high quality monitoring done with data that is scientifically defensible to help the case of the MPA closures, amongst many other things. So yeah, in short, the answer is no. We're never enough. Thanks.
Media, you're typing this furiously so we can get more money when they read your articles. Thank you so much to the panel. Those were my questions, ladies and gentlemen. I want to now open the floor to anyone who might want to ask questions to our esteemed panelists. I think there is a roving mic somewhere. Is there a roving? There we go. Our nimble mic handler will get to each one of you. And if you want to pose your question to an individual member to the panel, you can do that. Or if you want to just ask your question, they have assured me that they will choose who's the most appropriate person to answer. Yes, hot seats, cue danger music. To Claire, beautiful name.
Hi, I'm Claire from the Sunday Times. I just wondered about the change in molting behavior. Do you have any idea what's caused that? Are you aware of any effects from climate changes on the penguins?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We actually don't have a very clear idea. We are suspecting changes due to climate change as part of it. In fact, the breeding timing has shifted consistently over the last few years to be later in the year, which is unfortunate because then they're also more prone to severe storm events as well. And then when the birds are not well nourished, they tend to also get what we call an arrested molt, where they can't finish molting. And then those birds do also sometimes get taken to SANCCOB to be nurtured and to help them through the process. But yeah, there could be a number of reasons, but I suspect it's mostly nutrition related.
Thank you. I also would like you just to, once you ask your question, just tell us where you're from so we know who you are. That would be really helpful. Also, enthusiastic hands in the air for questions, please. Oh, here we go. The media doing what the media does.
Hi, I'm Lisa from Getaway Magazine. I've got a question for Craig. I could be barking up the wrong tree here, but from what I see, obviously industrial, huge trawlers, it's not an equitable way of fishing. They're taking a lot from coastal communities and sort of the wealthy few kind of thing. Have small-scale fishers, how unsustainably are they actually fishing? And is that to do with trying to compete with this? Have they always fished that way? And how, if so, how are you actually helping them get back to that more sort of balanced way of not taking more than they need?
No, brilliant question. You want?
Just answer that
Can I respond? Okay, shall I respond? No, a good question. And so firstly, maybe just to clarify, small-scale fishers are not really targeting small pelagics such as sardine and anchovy. So in that sense, it's not direct competition with the large industrial fisheries that fish for small pelagic. But where the indirect competition comes from is that the small pelagic resources are important food source for other top predatory fish in the marine ecosystem. So when we think about our snook, when we think about our geelbek, when we think about cob, when we think about yellowtail, all of those species are very much dependent on healthy resources of sardine and anchovy. So when those stocks tank sardine and anchovy, it's going to have knock-on effects for small-scale fishers. So that's a problem there. And already what we've seen in the small pelagic fishery, the industrial fishery, is that the West Coast sardine stock is depleted. And that's the current status of that. And we have further concerns that anchovy is on the lowest on record that the department has. So both key species of small pelagic that are fodder fish in the marine ecosystem are both at low levels, and that's going to have an incredible knock-on effect for the entire ecosystem and other users that are dependent on a healthy ecosystem. So that's we need to get to the point where the small pelagic fishery is managed not just for sardine and anchovy, but managed for the greater good of the ecosystem.
Very good answer. And I was quite interested that you're getting local people from the community, particularly young people, invested in helping you collect data, and there's also the app as well that citizen scientists can use. I don't know whether this is specifically for you, but what exactly what data are they collecting, and why is that? Why does that help us better understand what's happening?
Just to make sure I understand, are you referring to the app in terms of the Kogelberg Care app, which is that app? All right. Now that was an interesting development, and it has come with working with communities and trying to get communities involved in co-management and good stewards of their area. And some of the major concerns and complaints by communities is that they raise issues of poaching, they raise issues of environmental incidents to authorities, but they don't necessarily get an appropriate response. And you speak to authorities, and authorities also kind of constrained in terms of their capacities and their ability to respond. You also heard in terms of financial constraints by certain organizations, and this is pervasive through a number of our authorities. And the idea behind the app was, can we bring communities and authorities closer together so that basically there's extra eyes, extra ears from the communities that can filter in, provide information that authorities can act on in a real-time basis. Yeah. And that's not quite the app, but there's also, we do citizen science. So we've got them involved in, for example, it's called baited remote underwater videos. And so we basically have empowered, trained up community members together with scientists. They go out, deploy these baited remote underwater videos, and they get to observe basically the numbers of different species as well as abundance in MPA, outside of the MPA. And we've also trained these community members also to analyze the footage. And so some fascinating results is that this has led to some of the first time that community members have been involved in this sort of research and published papers on research. So that has been fantastic. And it's just one of the ways in which to bring community involved, get them interested, get them excited, give them a voice, and let them be part of the solution. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And there, Marshall is a perfect example of just that. Yeah.
The next question.
Hi, Nicole McCain from News 24. Primarily for Alistair, but everybody else can chip in. That 6-year review, is it soon enough, considering we're working towards this 2035 deadline of functional extinction? And then this is maybe more general. We've spoken about apps and wave bridges and tagging. What is some of the technology that we're harnessing in monitoring and protecting penguins?
I can do the first bit. Yeah, so that is a good question, given the forecasted 2035 extinction, which is based on current trajectories. So if the current decline rate persists, then it's forecast to go extinct in 2035. So based on the science we have from previous experimental closures, which were limited because they were 3 years on and off, so we couldn't measure things like recruitment and survival. But just based on the results of that, we scientists at the University of Exeter have already done forecasts into the future for Robben Island and Stony, incidentally, to show that the island closures should start showing results in terms of the population growth rates within about 5 years. But in terms of turning the tide on the actual population, you're talking over 10 years. So it will take a long time, but we must also recognize that the closures are not the silver bullet that are going to save African penguins. They are an important part of the collective mitigation measures. But as Craig was saying as well about managing the stocks more holistically in terms of an ecosystem approach to fisheries management is critical. So that's, I would say, probably the most important thing that needs to happen. But then mitigating the other threats, like Nicky mentioned about marine noise pollution, oiling, disease, predation, all those sort of things need to be managed as well, because the populations are so low and vulnerable to these sort of random impacts that could, tank half the population in a year if something broke out. So all these things need to be managed collectively. And if they are managed effectively, then the results should show with the island closures more prominently as well. So I don't know if that answers exactly your question, but there are other monitoring tools that can be looked at in the short term. The problem is to get the population level data that we need for advocacy and policy change, that can only come in a minimum of 6 years, given the sort of natural cycles of the birds.
Nicole, hi. Just to add on to that, the island closures that we're talking about is going to be really beneficial for breeding adult penguins. So just remembering that when juveniles fledge, they take off and they don't stay within those closures. So the ecosystem approach to fisheries is going to be really important to make sure that there is adequate fish stocks for different life stages of penguins. And that includes before they molt, which is a really critical life stage, and of course after they've molted, where they need to replenish and eat lots of food. So, yeah, the island closures are part of the story, and just to add to the technology question, so we are using passive integrated transponders, which are inserted into rehabilitated penguins that are released from SANCCOB, as well as a portion of wild penguins at colonies, which BirdLife are also assisting with, and then of course the automated weighbridge. So in combination, we're able to identify individual penguins. There's ground readers installed at colonies which record that unique transponder number, and then the weighbridge records the weight as they go out to the colony to feed and when they come back, so indicating how successful they are at their foraging trips. Okay, thanks.
I think we have a question at the back.
Hi, my name is Kim. I am a member of the BBC, Betty's Bay Conservancy. I'm also a penguin pal for Stony Point, and I'm a resident here at Betty's Bay. So I love my penguins. I waddle just as well as they do. So my question is, Alana, when we talk about getting the community involved, sometimes what I feel when I do talk to our community and everybody, they want to get involved. Okay, we've got the BBC, but the channels to get to CapeNature and to get involved, is there any way that, how do we get involved if we want to? We don't know exactly the channels, so it would be nice if there's some way that the community can let know, you know what, here I am, come talk to me. So it's just very difficult for the community to actually stand up and say, but I've got this fantastic idea to make money for the colony, but I don't know who to talk to. So that would be my question. Thanks.
Hi, Kim. Yeah, thanks for that question. It's something I've actually overheard even while walking around the colony here with tourists going, how do we donate more money? How do we, get involved? And it shouldn't be as complicated as it is. But in short, we do have the Protected Area Advisory Committee specifically for Stony Point and the Betty's Bay Marine Protected Area at this stage. That would be a really good platform to engage with. It's currently chaired by Steve, who's standing behind you there. And that would, I would say for now, is like the best way to really approach ideas. And there's a few of us that are more than willing to provide our contact details and engage around ideas around improving certain habitat conditions and things. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks so much, Kim. Any questions for our panel? We've got a question right here. Oh, even better. 2 questions in the front. Yes. He was like, where should he go first?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jeanette Wang from the Daily Maverick. I was wondering, and primarily for Nicky, but anyone can answer, could you expand on what the next threats are for African penguins? So beyond continuous evaluation and monitoring, what should we look at next?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Food availability remains the priority. We've spoken quite a bit about that today, but we are very concerned about predation. That is very much on our radar. Unfortunately, for land-based colonies such as Stony Point and Simonstown, they have to contend with marine threats like seals and sharks, and on land there's things like caracal and mongoose. Even domestic dogs pose a threat. So it's very difficult to try and manage a land-based colony and to try and manage all threats facing the species. So that is a major concern for us, and we're discussing ways on how we can support CapeNature with that. And then we are extremely worried about pollution underwater, so noise pollution. With activities such as ship-to-ship bunkering in Algoa Bay, it has been an ongoing concern since it started in 2016. And the closest colony, St. Croix, has suffered a dramatic decline. They've lost 85 to 90% of the population. And this correlates with when ship-to-ship fuel bunkering first started. So the first concern was the oil pollution. So for those who are not familiar with this practice, it's fuel bunkering at sea. So it's like a petrol station for vessels. They stop outside of port and they refuel their vessels. And this is a highly risky activity. It has been permitted in Algoa Bay because of the sheltered geography of that bay. But what we have realized is that it also causes an enormous amount of noise underwater because of the increase in vessel traffic attracted to this practice. So we're looking at some research and science to look at that, and of course we have advocated against that practice since 2016. So those are the two sort of major things that we'll be focusing on.
If I may, I'd just like to elaborate a little bit more on the predation factor. As Nicky said, it is challenging having land-based colonies because they've got threats from inland and from the ocean. And I think certainly from our side at Stony Point, we would like to, and we are prioritizing looking at predation. It's not a simple matter because if you remove one predator, it can simply get replaced by another. Predators are also important for maintaining ecosystem balances and preventing rapid growth of rodents and other things like that can obviously cause damage not only to the ecosystem but to human health as well. But yeah, that is definitely a priority. Boulders, I know at the moment, have been they've installed camera traps to help with monitoring and also look at the predator behavior and changes every time that they do get rid of a predator. So I would like to be able to have funding to implement similar type of monitoring at Stony Point. Thanks.
Question just behind you there.
Andrea Weiss, I'm from WWF, so Craig may not answer this question. Everyone knows the example of the oyster catchers that came back because there was a ban on beach driving. Is there any sort of similarity in what's happening with the closures, and how quickly can those fish stock recover? I know Craig might want to answer that, but I think Alistair should answer this question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We often get people asking, what's the realistic road to recovery? And there are examples in the past. So Robben Island's a good one. So in the early 90s, the population was sitting at around, I think it was about 1,200 pairs. And with it also coincided from that period on to the early 2000s with a very significant increase in sardine abundance. And that was correlated with a 5-fold increase in the penguin population. So the penguin population in a relatively short period of time, 12 years or so, increased by 500%. And if when the foraging conditions are really good for penguins, they can bring up 2 sets of chicks. So that's 4 chicks. And if the conditions persist until those chicks can breed, so for the next 4 to 6 years, you get compound growth. So the main aim for all of us should be, to support these populations should be to get those stocks as sustainable as possible for as long as possible.
So answering how quickly can the small pelagic stocks increase? You would think that because small pelagics are short-lived species, that if that's a well-managed fishery, that sardine and anchovy can bounce back quite quickly. But the sad reality is it's not quite as straightforward as that. And if we just look at an example as the Namibian small pelagic fishery, that fishery was a lot larger than our South African small pelagic fishery. And both sardine and anchovy has been decimated in Namibia. That fishery got to a point in 2018, the fishery was closed. It was supposed to be closed for a few years to allow the resources to bounce back. It's been 7 years later that resources haven't rebounded. Instead, other species have taken over the niche in the environment. So you've got pelagic gobies and jellyfish, which are very little value in terms of industrial fishing. or to the ecosystem. And we have major issues in terms of the penguins, the seabird species in Namibia has tanked drastically in Namibia. And so there comes a threshold with these species. When we push it beyond a threshold, we are really playing Russian roulette with the ecosystem, and we're not quite sure what the outcome will be. And that's just the Namibia example. Yeah.
Question, we've got a question at the back.
Carol from BirdLife Conservancy.
If you could just wait for the mic so we could hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Carol from the BirdLife Conservancy and also a Penguin Pal volunteer. Just wondering, when tourists come, obviously they come, they walk around the colony here, they might have something to drink, whatever, and they leave. Are they getting the right impression about how drastic things are after visiting, or is it just a nice experience? I mean, what about educating people before they come so they know what to look for, or educating via social media, whatever? Because we've been chatting about ideas. We don't just want people to come, say, gee, that's nice, tick it off my list, I've gone, I'm going back home. How can we leave them with a more realistic picture of what is actually going on?
Love that question. I don't know who it's for, but I think it's a great question. Yeah. I think you're in the hot seat, Alana.
Yeah, thanks. We are working with SANCCOB very closely, busy updating our signage to give a really realistic and sad picture of the status of the African penguin. Together with Picture and the advocacy team, we've also been discussing having even more interpretive signage on the boardwalk. You'll see that there is some there. And yeah, sure, I mean, like, you don't want visitors to come and feel like super depressed, but yes, we are trying to make sure that real, honest, factual information is available for them so they can be aware of the situation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We've got time for a few more questions, so please get your questions in. There are two there. Yeah.
Thank you to slot in with the Penguin Pals. My name is Teresa Els. I'm the local ward councillor here. So to come to Carol's question as well, what about the possibility of having like tourist guides here? It is a work opportunity, but there's a lot of people walking around. So as locals, we know, okay, the poor penguin is now molting, but then you hear the tourist, oh, shame, what's happening to this poor penguin? So what about tourist guides here for local entrepreneurship as well?
Great idea.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, that has been something in the back of my mind, not only for Stony Point, but for a few of our other sites where it would be nice to have a person talking to it. Yeah, I think we will take that discussion further with Shiraz and his team as well. But yeah, certainly it's not off the cards. As you know, we are in the process of looking at we've got funding to upgrade the boardwalk as well, so making it more accessible for people who, maybe are in wheelchairs or otherwise have mobility issues. So I think that will be great. And yes, I'm happy with the suggestion. It's definitely something to consider. We do have we have a lot of tourists, and in season and summer it's fairly predictable, the amounts, but as you know, in winter, so it would have to be something we could offer, but yeah, certainly not off the cards. Thanks.
And just to add to those two questions, I think they're fantastic because it looks in another alternative or another way of bringing communities closer. And we have, for example, WWF has been working with Sizonke Tours, also a community-based a group that has formed a tour guide organization. And it's those sort of ideas that we need to kind of push. We need to promote that. It provides work opportunities because, yes, there's lots of people that come through to Stony Point. There's lots of people that go to Boulders. I mean, the ecotourism potential is very, very high. And it's not just about a good feeling. I think it's the messaging that also needs to accompany that to make sure that people walk away and understand that this is a crisis. You might see penguins out there, but this is not what it's supposed to be. And also provide that agency that basically we need to do something, that There's builds the momentum that we can work with government, that we can work with NGOs, we can work with communities, with conservation society. That let's move this needle.
Yeah, Craig, I agree. There's opportunity sort of for a value-added experience as well. Stony Point is actually pretty damn cheap to go and look in for the experience that we've got compared to certain other sites. And I mean, it's, if you think about it, it's our current entrance fee is €2. So, we could be looking at having value-added experiences such as that. Thanks.
Just my question, maybe it's for you, Craig. Is there a challenge to then try and prove the economic value of saving the African penguin? Is that also what needs to happen for people to understand, if they're trying to assess reasons or trying to validate or motivate, that we also now have to bring the case of there is an economic value in all of this?
That's a fantastic question. I think if we just put our shoes or put our feet in government shoes, government has got an ambition to develop our economy, and rightly so. We need to move the needle in terms of the unemployment rates in South Africa. So, but in this case, when we talk about penguins and we talk about the small pelagic industry, the only economic arguments that were heard in that discourse was basically the amounts of jobs that potentially lost by the small pelagic industry. And so that's what government has been hearing up to date, is basically what is the potential losses there, what's the loss to the economy in fishing. The voice that hasn't been heard is what is the potential opportunity through ecotourism. And some of the studies that were done is actually quite amazing in terms of the economic opportunity through penguin tourism. I'm not talking about all marine tourism, just penguins alone. It's astounding. It equates to the small pelagic industry. So it needs to be taken seriously. That contribution needs to be considered in the debate.
Because I think that's what you're saying. Some people are looking at different indicators of what's more important, and it's unfortunate that we've come to the point where we need to motivate what the benefits are of saving the African penguin, because just saving it for some people is not enough, which is devastating in itself. We had a question from this gentleman in the front.
Hello, everyone. Brian Little from the Earth Agency. I suspect this is for Craig or perhaps Alistair, but I was wondering if you could just unpack what this lady's question was around the fishing, the difference between small-scale fishers and the commercial fishers, because there is a perception amongst the public that it's the small-scale fishers that are doing the damage by. And could you maybe just unpack the difference between those two things? And then secondly, do you feel that the plight of the African penguin is intertwined with that of the small-scale fishers?
Yeah, so it's similar to the question that was asked earlier. And I think maybe the perception is that when we look at small-scale fishers, they operate in the nearshore, they operate along the coast, so they're a lot easier to see and what they do. So yes, there is a stigma attached that basically that they are, in some cases, they're depleting certain resources. And along this stretch of the coast, some of the resources that has been targeted in sometimes an illegal manner has been abalone and lobster. But that's the typical high-value species that people are targeting in order to make ends meet, but that's not an impact on the penguins per se. The large industrial fishery that targets small pelagics doesn't operate in the nearshore environment. They operate a lot further offshore, so they're typically out of sight of the public. But in terms of the volume of catch that they generate per year, it's the largest volume of catch of any of our South African fisheries. They take out anywhere between 3.5 million to 4 million tons of anchovy and sardine in a good year. So that's just what's been declared. That's not in terms of any slippage or any dumping. That's just in terms of what has been declared. So when we look at the demise of the penguins, the linkages for the small-scale fishers is not the small-scale fishers necessarily causing the demise of the penguins, but the demise of the penguins is a warning It's a warning bell that's sounding that all is not right in the marine ecosystem. And small-scale fishes, which is a very vulnerable group, will also be impacted in terms of the ripple effects, in terms of when we don't have enough food in the system to sustain all the trophic levels in the system.
We've got time for one more. Okay, we'll take these two more questions and then we'll close it off with a round of questions for the panel. So yes, you can go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Lizo. I'm a journalist from Ground Up. I have a question for any of the panelists. Will the various no-take zones be sufficient for the fish stocks to increase? And do you think that this will mitigate overfishing?
So when you say sufficient to mitigate resource competition with the purse seine fishery, it's not a straightforward answer, because it depends on the natural availability of the prey itself. So what you find, and also examples in other countries for other species similar to African penguins, like seabirds reliant also on forage fish species, is that when the stocks are relatively low, like now, then resource competition is elevated, because there's obviously fewer fish to go around for both the purse seiners and also the predators like penguins and snook that feed on them. So in that instance, closures have been shown to be more effective, and that seems to be the situation in the past couple of decades, since the early 2000s, that the stocks have been declining. Hopefully they'll improve, and if they do improve and get to levels like sardine was in the early 2000s, then the impact of the closure could ultimately be nullified, because there'll be enough fish for the penguins and the other top predators, and also purse seine fishes, if the allocations are sustainable. So if the exploitation rates allocated from government are not excessive, so that the stocks are driven down again. So I don't know if that answers enough. Cool.
Okay, hi guys, it's Philippa from Earth Agency. Just a continuation for you, Craig. The fish, the sardines and anchovies that get fished, where do they go?
Okay, so that's the biggest fishery by volume landed, and in terms of the sardine, it's typically canned, and it's canned for typically local consumption. So you will see that in a lot of our supermarkets, you'll find canned sardine. And an interesting thing about the canned sardine is that the fish stocks are so low that about 90% of what's in that can is not even from South Africa. It's been substituted by imports of sardine from Morocco. So that's the current status on sardine. Anchovy is used for in aquaculture activities. It's also used as animal feed. So basically, a lot of that is exported. So as fish meal, fish oil. That's what happens with anchovy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to put our panelists on the spot. We've run out of time for questions from you, the audience, but they are still around. So if you didn't get your question in, please feel free to have a chat with them, because they will still be here. I just would like to pose a final question to each one of you from where you are sitting, from the organization that you're representing. What are the next priority steps in your mind that need to be taken to ensure the growth of the African penguin population here at Stony Point in particular? I'll start with you, Craig.
Yeah, another good question. And so firstly, we celebrate the wins of SANCCOB and BirdLife in terms of the settlement of the court case, because that has extended the closure. But the battle is still raging. We haven't won it just yet. We need to secure it. As Alistair mentioned, we've got 10 years in terms of that agreement. So we need to look at how we can make it more permanent, so that we can have less disturbance for our foraging penguins. So that's going to be a critical one for us. And the second one is coming back to this whole issue of food in the ecosystem. So we need to work hard with government, with the small pelagic industry to make that fishery be more sustainable, so that basically top predators in the marine ecosystem is considered when things like the total allowable catch is determined by government for the small pelagic industry, that makes provision for what is the offtake required by these top predators. And that's going to be a vitally important one as well.
Nicky, from SANCCOB's point of view, what do you feel are the next priority steps that need to happen?
I mean, I fully agree with Craig. The food is the most important. It's, you know, we can tackle everything else, and for our organisation, it is absolutely futile for us to be putting so much effort and resources into hand-rearing chicks and releasing them back into the wild and performing life-saving surgery, etc. If there's no food in the ecosystem, it's going to get to a point that it will be unethical to release birds into an environment that cannot sustain them. And that is a real concern. So we don't want to get to that point. We want to make sure that we put the effort in now, and it is going to be a collective effort to make sure that there is enough food to sustain these birds going into the future. And then, of course, all the other threats facing the species, and whether that's, you know, the predation that I mentioned earlier, the underwater noise pollution, all of these things need just as much attention, because it's not just one threat. We have been criticized in the past about focusing just on the fish, and I don't think we've ever done that. We've always acknowledged there are a myriad of threats facing the species, but I think for this particular colony, we have to acknowledge what the problem areas are and use the partnerships that we have today to tackle them together.
Thank you. Same thing to you, Alistair, from BirdLife SA. What are the next steps?
So yeah, similar to Craig and Nicky. Obviously, the food issue is the big priority for us. So at different scales, so depending on what the birds need when. So for during the breeding and before and after molt, we know they're closer to their colonies. So, you know, crucial that the island closures are in, but they're monitored. But in 6 years' time, we can see if they are big enough, if they're dealing with things like edge effects, like Footassen Island, for instance. The split closure around Dyer Island, which is vessel size restricted, is that adequate? We don't know. We need to find common solutions with industry as well, to look at the small players as well, look at the impacts on communities. And then, crucially, we really need to think out the box with an ecosystem approach to fisheries management. And there are international examples of different mechanisms that the fisheries branch in DFFE could potentially integrate into what they call the operational management procedures, to look at looking at a whole suite of indicators that could improve the sustainable management of those fish stocks for penguins, both during the breeding season, but outside the breeding season when they go a lot further from these colonies. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. The other important question, and I know Teresa and Carol brought this up in terms of ecotourism. I think there's a big opportunity to enhance ecotourism potential as well. So BirdLife, we're just starting to work with other programs in BirdLife. We've got an Empowering People program. They mostly work inland, training bird guides, getting them accredited, getting them skills, and developing the small business management skills as well. And we've been talking very closely about upskilling local community members here to get those qualifications to focus on marine tourism as well. So I think there's a big opportunity, like Craig said, to bring that voice into the picture. It's always been penguins against industrial fisheries, but there are other stakeholders like small-scale fishers as well that are really important to bring into the discussion.
Thanks, Alistair. I love that. And for you, Alana, last words. What do you, as CapeNature, see as some priorities in your focus?
Sure, last words. So I did refer earlier to looking at, getting more information and dealing with predation in a sustainable way. Another big priority for us is looking at access so that tourists can have a good experience whilst having minimal impact and disturbance on the birds, particularly when they're molting and when they're breeding and then they're highly sensitive. We already have projects underway to provide artificial nesting so that they've got shelter to breed and to protect themselves from predators, as well as brush packing so they can do some natural nesting. But I think from my side, we absolutely cannot look at Stony Point in isolation. There's evidence, of birds that have been released, the tag birds. There was one male, they found him all the way up on the border of Namibia. So they swim far and wide in search of food, and the further they have to swim, the more energy they use and the more vulnerable they become to predation and other things. Outside of breeding season, we found birds tagged here. We found them on Robben Island and Dyer Island. So it's a big system. And for me, from a more scientific point of view, I think it's very important that we align our monitoring protocols across all the colonies so that we get the consistent data and data that we can use as evidence to support these closures, for one thing. And also just to make sure that we really have a handle on the trend, on the population trends of all the colonies. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alana. Just a round of applause for our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to, before I release you from the stage, we just want to give you a token of appreciation as Andrea sprints across the stage. Thank you so much to you, Alana. Thank you, Alistair. We appreciate you, Nicky. Thank you so much, Craig. And thank you to each one of you also for participating and getting your questions in. Like I did say earlier, if you want to chat to any one of our panelists, maybe you were too shy to raise your hand, please find them, chat to them, get your question answered. Thanks once again to each one of our panelists.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.